Okay, greetings and welcome to Writers on Writing. I'm your host, Dr. Brenda Greene, professor at Medgar Evers College, founder and director emeritus of the Center for Black Literature. And Writers on Writing comes to you every Sunday and gives you an opportunity to hear writers from the African diaspora talk about their work, their lives, and their craft. And this radio show is paid for by Medgar Evers College. You can also watch us online on the Center for Black Literature YouTube page at www.centerforblackLiterature.org. I'm very, very pleased to have with me today the powerful leader, daughter of Malcolm X, Dr. Ilyasah Shabazz. Welcome, Dr. Shabazz.
Thank you, Dr. Greene, Dr. Brenda Greene. I'm so happy to have this honor, privilege, opportunity to talk to you for a few minutes today.
And thank you for giving us this time. This is a very, very, very busy time, as you prepare for the 100th anniversary of the birth of your late father. But Dr. Ilyasah Shabazz is the third daughter of Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz. She's an educator, activist, motivational speaker, and the author of multiple award-winning publications. And I'm just going to name them. Malcolm Little, the boy who grew up to be Malcolm X, Betty Before X, Growing Up, a memoir of the daughter of Malcolm X.
And that's actually Growing Up X. A lot of people always say, I have your book Growing Up. I'm like, it's Growing Up X.
They don't put that on the cover.
Well, it is. It's that red X. And right on top of it is
You have to, okay, then I'm not reading it properly. Okay, thank you. And then, of course, the novel, X, a novel, and The Awakening of Malcolm X, a novel by Dr. IlysahShabazz. She has co-authored these books with many writers, and they are fictional, except for the memoir, of course, but they really enhance our understanding and our knowledge of who Malcolm X was. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. You have done this because you believe in sustaining legacy. So talk to us about that. Why is it so important for us to sustain the legacy of Malcolm X?
Well, one of the things that I learned from my mother, and even when I looked at my father's life, when we allow others control of our narrative, it is not accurate, right? And so I not only wanted to make sure that I continued my mother's work because I just loved her so much, and for the benefit of our, future generations, for the benefit of our prior foreparents, all of the antecedents. I think it's so important to uh, control the narrative ourselves and to allow others an opportunity to open a book, see a reflection of themselves or a reflection, of others, and not only be inspired through reading the book, but also, um, learning accurate, hints, accurate information.
Right. And as I was reading the books, I felt like I was really getting a perspective I had not thought about. How were you able to achieve that? And you did it by really good dialogue and I guess interviewing people, but how were you able to really achieve that and create books that were so engaging?
You know, first of all, it takes a lot to really grasp, to hold on to my attention. And my mother used to say, when I was a child, everyone would call me Ilyasah, Ilyasah, and I just didn't listen. But when my father called me, there was just something about that, urgency, that command that had me stop in my seat. And so growing up, I was writing stories, I was creating, these movies. I would get my friends and we'd put on a show for our family or at school. And I just, I want to make sure that I get your attention, that, I speak to your core. And while speaking to your core, just pour something into it. And even at the Shabazz Center, there's a mural. My mother um, always said, if you want to do something, you've got to do it right. And for God's sake, follow through every tiny detail. So you have to create that image so no one can ever create it. I see these references to my father, these these statues that are created, and they're like 4 feet 6. And my father was 6 foot 4.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's, let us say this is what he looked like. This is how he appeared. This is, what he represented when he walked into a room, not only in the physical form, but the spirit. And so it's articulating that and making sure that no one can ever come back and alter these descriptions.
Well, you've done an excellent job, and you shared with me that one of the books you really, really prize is The Awakening of Malcolm X, and now I know why you said that. So talk to us a little bit about The Awakening of Malcolm X and how that really, really enhances who he is in a more detailed way.
Yes, because it focuses on, first, my book about the Malcolm Little, the boy who grew up to become Malcolm X. When I set out to do a children's book, many people were like, "How can you do a children's book on Malcolm X?" Right? And it's important that for my young adult books, that it's clear you don't go into prison an illiterate, deviant thug raised by parents who did nothing for you, right? And miraculously walk out as Malcolm X, the icon, right? It's Malcolm's foundation. And so in all of my books, I always try to focus on his parents, his family, the foundation that enabled this young man to go into prison at the age of 19 or 20 and to come out, the man that received all of these, this tutelage and this love and this wealth of information and encouragement about who he was, his identity. And, that enabled him to sit back and revel in all from which he was running, running from himself against the backdrop of Jim Crow. Your parents tell you you can be everything, and now your father has been lynched, your mother has been taken to an institution, your family has been torn apart. This land that your family owned that was reserved for whites only has been taken. And so you have to sit in all of these things that your parents told you about yourself. And when Malcolm had no guidance, much like our young people, if we are not nurturing them and providing the kind of information that you provided in your sons, if we're not doing that, what is going to happen? Society is going to determine their destiny. So we want to make sure that we pour into our young people, even at the Shabazz Center, with this intergenerational leadership development, that we're pouring into our children, as we're seeing that's happening now around the world with young people of color, with indigenous families, descendant of indigenous people. We want to make sure that they know the significant contributions of their foreparents, the purpose of life, so that we are allowed to control our own destinies.
Well, thank you. We're going to come back to that, but before we do that, talk about your mother. The book on Betty Shabazz was just so moving to me, having known her, and I could see that. And you suspected that she was raising you in the way you did, but you really didn't know. There's so much we didn't know about her. Talk to us about your mother. You had a beautiful relationship, loving relationship. Um,
Yeah.
she's a powerful woman.
She was, I mean, just so amazing. And I always say that I feel so honored and so blessed to have had her as my role model, to, show me what it is to truly be loved, to know that I am worthy of love, that I'm worthy of a quality education, that I'm worthy to participate in mainstream society just as I am. I'm just so grateful that, she was my best friend, that there was nothing that my mother asked of me that I ever said no. And, it's funny growing up, my five sisters, especially my eldest sister, would always say that I was mommy's doll. Whatever mommy told me to do, she'd wind me up and I do it. And I'm like, of course, because I knew my mother loved me, and I think that's sometimes the challenge when as young people we're growing up, we have our parents, they're telling us one thing, but we don't want to do it, or we think, oh, what do you know? Well, they've been where we are and they're going to give us the best advice because they love us. They really care about us. And so, I think I'm very fortunate that I always knew and I always trusted on my mother and her love and her guidance.
Right.
Um, a- and, it's also one of the reasons why Medgar Evers remains, so dear to my heart, because that's where my mother spent, the majority of her time after the assassination of her husband, and how she was able to be in Westchester County and raise six babies and travel first to Massachusetts, to Amherst College, to get her PhD after witnessing the firebombing of her home where she and her husband were, lay together, and then witnessing the assassination, the political assassination of her husband as a young woman, not even 30, while pregnant with twins, is miraculous to me. That she was still super kind, super loving, and very protective of her family, and travel to Brooklyn and be in that community and help raise funds and raise young people and make sure that these young students knew their value. Just the same thing that she poured into her children at home, she poured into the students at Medgar Evers. I know Ayanla Van Zant was one of my mother's students, and I was able to really connect strongly with her for those reasons. But coming to Medgar Evers, and one really funny thing is, whenever I came, my mother was just, she would say, Yassi, she called me Yasa. Yasa, Yasa, come on, honey, come on, sugar. She would tell me to park before you had that courtyard. I had the opportunity to park on that little embankment that's right outside the front door.
Yeah.
She was,
Right.
I mean, amazing, amazing,
Amazing.
amazing person.
Right. And she also gave so much to other people, to the world, through her, traveling and other organizations and connecting
That's
with
right,
people.
and there are so many people who would say to me that she said, I went to Brazil with your mother, or I met your mother in Brazil, or I was in China, or wherever my mother was, or even at the college, and that my mother would give them a bag and say, hold on to this. And and then they would call and say, Dr. Shabazz, I have your bag. And and in the bag would be money, and that was for them. And just, so many things that she did, but she had six girls,
Right.
and so that speaks to the power of her faith in God, you know.
Right. So just going back to, I'm going to say some words and just get your reflections. The journals that Malcolm X did to Mecca, your thoughts, your reflections on that.
Oh gosh, they're very heartwarming, because in those journals you understand his righteousness. You understand his morals, his values, these ethics that were instilled in him by his mother. You know, you understand that he was a true principled and disciplined man, young man, because he was only 39 when he was assassinated.
Right.
And that he traveled to the Middle East when most people weren't traveling on planes, and certainly it would be for vacation of some sort, but that he traveled in search of solutions to the human, condition of injustice and all these horrible things that were happening. And he also spoke so much of the sense of feeling lonely.
Yes. Yes. Right. The autobiography as told to Malcolm X.
Genius, genius,
Okay,
because
Alan.
even an effort to finagle some of his writing, inserting some of these things that my father couldn't have said. Just some of these things that it is still it resonates with people from all walks of life,
Okay.
of inspiration.
Yes, yes, it still does. People are still assigning the autobiography, the movie, Spike Lee.
Uh, I thought that was actually genius, um, because it's really a reflection of the autobiography, right? But I thought the way he opened up the movie with the burning flag that burned into an X, you know, it was just a complete masterpiece.
Yes. Well, you also, I think you've done film also, so you're studying the culture. Percy Sutton.
Oh, Percy Sutton, he was an incredible man. When I think about him, though, I think, he owned all of these radio stations across the country because we understood the importance of controlling our narrative and the information that is disseminating to our children. But even owning the Apollo, and now that all of that, has been
Right.
taken away. So again, it speaks to the necessity of training our young people to mentor the next generation, and so forth. That it's
Right.
not just about we are recipients of this great movement of history of our identity and purpose, but that we let the next generation know that they have to also mentor that following generation and encourage them to let the next generation know that they have to pass on this tradition and legacy.
Right. And he was a strong supporter of you, your mother, and the family,
Yes, that's right.
as was Ozzie Davis.
That's right.
Ozzie Davis,
Yeah,
Ruby
incredible.
Dee.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us about the work at the Shabazz Center and what you're doing, because you're very much involved in, I mean, your part of your DNA is activism now. So tell us about the Shabazz Center. And
That's right. So the Shabazz Center, my mother had brought me there before she passed away, and she showed me the work that they were doing because I hadn't known about it. And, I remember seeing a bank on the corner, and I said, "Well, why is the bank there? Why don't we have this whole space?" And, she explained it. And but what I know is this was a place that represented tragedy, and to my mother, it was a place where her husband, was blown up, 21 gunshots, ripped out his body, and my mother, we have a photograph of her on her knees because she was an RN over her husband, um opening up his tie, giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, mouth-to-mouth, and just the pain of all of that, the trauma of all of that, and that we were back at that space that she never spoke about when we were, growing up, and that she brought me there, and she turned a place that represented tragedy to her into a place of triumph for others,
mhm,
so that other scholars could come, convene, and address our issues, that we could unite, that we could have cultural programming, all of these great things that we could learn about the true legacy of Malcolm X for the benefit of truth, progress, culture, identity. And so I became recently the chairperson of the Shabazz Center. We've had some, different board members that have helped us along the way. But maybe in the last year, a little over about a year or so, I became the chairperson of the Shabazz Center, and we are, doing our best to make sure that we leave a jewel for the next generation. And so we welcome, your students at Medgar Evers to come and volunteer, to come and help us as we are doing that, to come and participate in programming, youth advocacy, just about everything that you can think of.
well, thank you for
And
doing
of
that
course,
work,
and we're fundraising always.
as always. Yes. So when you think about what's going on in the world today, um, what do you think? what message would Malcolm X be giving us?
Well,
How we move forward? Where do we go from here?
right. Um, my father held up a mirror to all of these horrific crimes that were happening to humanity, our humanity, right? And I think it's one of the reasons why people are still attracted, young people especially all around the world and older, are attracted to Malcolm's message because he spoke truth, and we know that truth is timeless. Um, but he said, if you put a knife in my back 9 inches and you pull it out 6 inches, the knife is still in my back. If you pull it all the way out, that's not progress. There's an open wound. Progress is healing the wound that the blow made. And so it's this sense of compassion, right? Because I've heard some people say when they witnessed, what was happening in Gaza, that that's not our problem. It is our problem, right? They're our brothers, and that's an extension of our identity. And so progress is healing the wound that the blow made. It's coming together based on what we have in common to address these challenges, rather give into these divisive tactics, that have continually happened, along these generational journeys. And so it's coming together like, we see Ibrahim Traore what is it? I can't even think of. Is it Burkina Faso? What did
Yes,
I
yes, yes.
okay.
Okay.
That now we have, as my father said, because we have to remember where our mentality in the 1950s and 60s, right? We didn't look at each other and like what we saw, right? And so there was this say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud movement. But when he said that there will be a time where we will stand up in unity, and when we see something happening to someone else, we will have the capacity to care. We will have the capacity to unite based on the common good of all people against the minority of ill will evildoers.
Right. He would have us really looking at it very clearly in the face, looking at the reality. As I think about the the message, going back to your books, the message that you have and the message that he had, what is the message that you have to young men and women who are looking at what is happening and really sometimes fearful of the future, the Palestinians children, the Black men in the criminal justice system, the fact I just read this morning that the Judiciary Committee, members of the Judiciary Committee in the United States United States Congress have decided or approved a resolution to deport US citizens. So what would you say to them?
You know, we look at the ballot or the bullet, right? That we have to be active. Um, what I'm getting a lot of inspiration from when we look at how young people uh, ignited a mass movement during COVID, where they got people in this country, people around the world and 18 other countries to come together and unite against um, or in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm losing my thought. I'm going into so many. I mean, there's just so much. The Black Lives Matter movement. What was the intention, right? It was Dr. Carter G. Woodson who said, the biggest race in the 1950s is to see who will control the minds of young people. So it is
Yes.
young people to recognize the power that they possess. And so I think when we look at what young people have been able to do, and we look at what young people are doing across the world, especially in these first world nations, and they're saying no more, and they're coming together in mass movements. As long as we are strategic and we are not just running out there and marching and protesting without knowing what we're marching and protesting for, so that when we go back to our rooms, go back to our homes, that, the march is over, but what have we accomplished? As long as we know and we identify what we want to accomplish in the purpose of, these mass movements, I don't want to.
I think what you're saying is so important, that you're not marching just to be marching. It has to be very strategic and purpose driven. And it was Burkina Faso. We were trying to remember the name, but it has to be very purposeful. And it goes back to another saying of your father: by any means necessary. So what does any means necessary mean? And when he first said that, people said, oh, he's promoting violence. But that's not what by any means necessary means.
Absolutely not. And, years ago, when people would interview me, they would always say that my father was controversial and all these things. My father did not create slavery. My father did not create all of these unjust acts. My father had enough compassion and accountability and responsibility to address these issues. And so, I think of an interview where someone is asking him all these things, and he said, "Don't put the onus on me. I didn't create these problems. I'm not the criminal. I am addressing these issues, right? And looking for a resolution."
Yes. Okay, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
this interview. And I encourage you to get the books of Dr. Ilyasah Shabazz. I don't know if did I get it correct?
Ilyasah,
Ilyasah
and at
Shabazz.
theshabazcenter.org.
Okay. Say that again, please.
Yes, it's theshabazcenter.org. So it's THESHABAZZCENTR.org, theshabazcenter.org, because we're going to have our celebration on May 19th. And there's just so many great activities that we have planned for the summer. It's my father's centennial. It's his 100th birthday, which I can't even believe. I mean, I'm old enough today to be my father's mother, and still I'm so proud of him.
Well, we are very proud of you, and I commend you for continuing and sustaining that legacy. That is so important. You have been listening to Writers on Writing with Dr. Brenda Greene and Dr. Ilyasah Shabazz. And please write to us at info@centerforblackLiterature.org. Remember, the writer is always reading, the reader is always writing. Keep reading and writing and empower yourselves as readers and writers. And this show is paid for by Medgar Evers College. Thank you.